Greetings, everyone. You'll remember when we started this YouTube channel, we said we are discussing politics, documentation, and the social issues. So in this video, we are discussing a social issue which is of interest to most of the subscribers on this YouTube channel. If you are not yet a subscriber, please do subscribe, like the video, and circulate to your contacts. The issue that we are discussing is burial. We now know, we know that the Muslims, those of Muslim faith, when a person dies, they bury that person within 12 hours or even before. They don't put the body in the morgue as other faiths do. This is what even in Africa we used to do. But we'll discuss later what we used to do in Africa. It appears to many that now this has become a Muslim tradition to bury a person within 12 hours or even before 24 hours. If a person of Muslim faith dies. This is what we've been witnessing. But is this really a tradition or a custom amongst the Muslim faithfuls? We do not think so. I was talking to one of my comrades who's a Muslim. I said, Chief, he's a comrade of mine. So I said, Chief, can you explain this burial? Because I was saying to him, he's from Cape Town. So I was saying to him, if your relative dies in Cape Town, you're in Johannesburg, or your son dies in the United States, and you are required to bury them within 12 hours, within 24 hours, what happens? It says, no, the person will be buried wherever they are. So it becomes kind of a custom that is now respected within the Muslim community. But what are the origins of this? I'm not familiar with the Quran, so I will not argue and say it is not in the Quran. I'm not very sure. But what I know, or what I've been told to be the origins of this 12-hour burial period, this has its roots in the Middle East. You know, in the Middle East, it is very hot. So a person dies, say in the morning around 5 a.m. By noon, if the person is not moved to a mortuary, by noon, the body will be decomposing. So when this started, they did not have mortuaries in the Middle East. It was too hot, and you could not keep the body for any day long. So what then happened was if a person dies, the person will be buried immediately within the next 12 hours or even shorter than that. So it has its origins in the Middle East. We know that many people in the Middle East are of Muslim faith. So because it started influenced by the weather conditions in the Middle East, it has now become a norm or a tradition. Just like in our case in Zimbabwe. You know, when during the liberation struggle, if there was death in the family, we are in Makwekwe or in Mbare, there's death in the family. The Rhodesian forces always suspected that people would gather in a house, have political meetings. So they then said, if there is a death in the family and you are in the city, we have to remove the curtains so that when the police patrol, they will see that people are actually mourning inside the house. Because if you did not remove the curtains, the assumption from the Ian Smith security forces was that you are holding a political meeting. This has now become kind of a tradition or a norm. If a death message arrives in Zimbabwe, even if a person dies in Johannesburg, they remove curtains. It has become the norm. Of course, in the rural areas, it is not the norm because in the majority of cases, there are no curtains to remove to start with. But in urban areas, it has now become the norm that when a person dies or there's death in the family, the first thing that people do is to remove the curtains. But is this our tradition? No, it is not our tradition. But it was created by the prevailing conditions at the time because the Smith soldiers or security forces insisted that if you gather in a house, you needed to have a permission which you are going to be refused. But if there is death in the family, so as a sign to show that there is death in the family, you remove the curtains. And it has now become a normal tradition. Even today in 2022, if a person dies in urban areas, they will remove the curtains. But you ask them, why are you removing the curtains? They will not explain because it is now just a norm or a practice. So similarly, because of the conditions that existed, as I understand, in the Middle East, it became necessary to bury a body within 12 hours. This is what we also used to do in the village. If a person died in the village, the elders will start immediately the preparations for a burial, and the person will be buried within the next 12 hours or 24 hours. Because again, in the village, you cannot keep the body, but in some villages, they can keep the body longer than a day. What they do, they take river sand and they put it where the body is. They will pour water on top. They put the body on top of the river sand. They pour water so that the body does not decompose. That is in the rural areas because it would be kind of expensive to, in some cases, to carry the body to the city where there's a mortuary and then you bring it back for reburial. So while they will be informing everyone, because this also started because in the main, other family members will be in the city. So they might need 24 hours to get to the village so that the burial will commence. So they would then get river sand and they put water, pour water and put the pot on top so that it does not decompose. As opposed to take it to the mortuary and then it be buried later. But of course, people do so, take the body to the mortuary. But in a number of instances, if a person in the village dies, is immediately buried. In some cases, when a person is critically ill and is discharged from hospital, what I've observed in the village, every family member is invited to say, "Hi, ubani sekusala. These are the last days of our relative." So every person or every relative is summoned to the village to be where the terminally ill relative is, to say our goodbyes. So when the person then dies, it is then that the person is immediately buried because everyone is in the village. There's no one to wait for. But if it's a sudden death or a short illness, it is then that these days the body will be transported 120 kilometers, depending on where you are, to a city or to where there is a mortuary for the body to be stored in a mortuary until every relative, those that need to be in the funeral, are there. Because there's also this in African culture that you do not bury a person when their kids are not in, unless it becomes very impossible for children to attend the burial, because some spirits are involved. Because they say if you bury when they are not there, it will be problematic. They are spiritually. But what we know is that if a person dies in the village, which we grew up knowing, is that those that are not in cannot make it in time for the funeral. You will then visit the gravesite to pay your last respect, put a stone as a sign of showing that you also came to pay your respect to the departed family member. So, and the other thing also, if you look into the burial of members of the Muslim faith, the burial is not expensive. Unlike what you see where we buy expensive casket, there is a food, everything. It becomes we do it expensive. It becomes expensive. But when you bury a person within 12 hours or 24 hours, you spend less because people will not be gathering to mourn. So a person dies at 5 in the morning, by 4 o'clock the person is buried. So there's no reason for people to gather for the next 2 days in the family home where they lost their loved one. In the village, what I witnessed, if a person dies, people, they will stop doing work. They will not go to the fields. They will not do any work in the village until the departed person in the village is buried. So the reason also to bury a person quick was to allow people to continue with their their work in the fields, so that there's minimum disruption in terms of people's work. But if you keep the body for over a week, people will literally suspend their work in the village. You cannot cut firewood. You cannot. I'm not sure about firewood, but you cannot dig the soil for the respect of the departed. So people in the entire village will not be waiting for the burial to happen. So by burying a person within a short space of time, 12 to 24 hours, it affords members of the village to continue with their village. I mean, with their work in the village. But of course, we are now spread out in different countries. Like I'm saying, I was talking to my comrade to say, if your relative dies in the United States, it takes 18 hours for a flight to get, say, to South Africa. What happens? So they quickly bury the person where they've died from, where they died. But of course, biblical, which most people do, is an instruction, or they take it from the Bible. A person dies in Joburg. People insist that a person must be buried amongst his relatives, those that have died before the person who's been buried. This is taken from the Bible. You know the story of Jacob, the father of Joseph. When Jacob died, if you read Genesis 49, verse 29, it will tell you that Jacob instructed. Let me quote what the Bible said. I asked the comrade to donate a Bible to me. I think he's still is still trying to get me the Bible. But it says in verse 29, that is Jacob 29, says, then he charged them and said to them, quote, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ekron the Hittite. That's then the verse 30 says, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ekron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. Close quote. So that's the instruction that Jacob gave to his sons before he died. After giving, the Bible says, after giving these instructions to his sons, he breathed his last, and his sons, they carried his body to be buried amongst his people. This is now has become again the norm, that a person works in Johannesburg, they spend most of their time in South Africa or in Johannesburg. When they die, their body is transported to Burundi, transported to DRC, I know a pastor of a church, Christ Embassy, was a pastor at Christ Embassy from Congo. He passed on, the body transported to Congo for burial. We always transport our dead relatives to Zimbabwe. Someone is transported to Eastern Cape. When they work in Johannesburg, they die in Johannesburg. Their body is transported to Eastern Cape, KZN, and so forth. It is taken from this scripture in the Bible that a person must be buried amongst their people. And also, in the African custom or in the African tradition, because if it's an elder person that has died, there is a ceremony that is performed maybe after a year called Umbuyiso, where you bring the spirit to the home. So if the person is buried, say in Johannesburg, the family is in Zimbabwe, so it becomes difficult to perform such a ceremony after a year or so. So this is why people transport the body. Others, of course, they bury where their children are. For instance, if a person is from DRC or is from Nigeria, they will say because the children are in Johannesburg, so the father should be buried in Johannesburg so that children can from time to time visit the gravesite of their departed father. So what do you say about the burial itself? In some cultures and religions, like the Muslim religion, as we are discussing about it, it is not expensive. In the African society, you will know that we did not use coffins before. There was a way how a person was buried. What they did, they would slaughter a cow, cover the body with the cow skin. This is what happened. In that process, because you have slaughtered a cow, because you want to use the skin to cover the body of the person who has died, naturally there's meat, and people will then eat meat. So again, it has become a tradition that if there is death in the family, after burial, people must again gather in the home to feast, so to speak, to feast. I'm not sure whether this is a tradition, but it's now becoming the norm. But its origins, again, and I wish someone would correct me, is that elders wanted a skin, a cow skin, so that they cover the body of the person that had departed. In the most cases, it was elderly people. You cover their body with the cow skin, and naturally there's meat, which obviously would be feasted by the people. And now it is now the norm that when there's death in the family, there must be meals after the burial, which now some in Soweto they call after tears. And in the Muslim faith, they don't, unless I'm not sure in special circumstances, I'm not sure what those special circumstances are, but they do not buy expensive caskets. They simply wrap the body with a cheap cloth. You remember, I think it was in Saudi Arabia or what, it was on television when you saw the body. I think it was the prime minister, which was wrapped in simple clothing when he was being buried. So it is not expensive. But some of us, we spend huge amounts of money for burial. We buy expensive caskets. We buy expensive things to say goodbye to the departed. We hire catering company to come and serve people who have come to assist in the burial. It becomes expensive. What I observed in my village when I was growing up as a young boy is that if there was death in the family, members of the village, they will come carrying meal in a plate, a meal, they will put it there. Someone bring a meal, they combine all that, then they cook for the people that are there. So it was not really the responsibility of the family. The family, if it's an elderly person, as I've said, they will slaughter a cow to use the cow skin to cover the body, and other village members, they will be bringing meal to assist in the cooking in the village. Please share with us I know most of you, you have policies, and we have said it's important that you join a burial society because, for a simple reason, that when you die, it is required that you will, or if I die, I want to be buried in my village. So it is expensive because if I were to die to transport my body to my village, it would cost about 20,000. So if I do not belong to a burial society, it means people now have to contribute, which will be a hard on the people. So what we have come to know, this is why we belong to burial societies, is that we have to contribute. But next time we'll talk about this money that is in the accounts. People bank the burial society money is not being invested. We need to talk about this. We have serious issues around infrastructure. We have serious issues around investment and so forth. If I'm a member of a society for 20, 30 years, but when I die, my society simply carries my body for burial and my children are left with nothing. So we need to talk about these things in the next video, about investing burial society monies so that when I die, my children have something to get as part of investment. Of course, I'm a communist. If we were in a socialist society, you know, we don't encourage that children should inherit anything from their parents, because the working class and the peasants are in charge of the state, and it is the state's responsibility to take care of everyone. But in this case, we're in a socialist, we're in a capitalist state, so it is important that we all save for our children. Otherwise, Amandla, comrades.